Peak player numbers still smashing all Path of Exile 1 records by a long shot, over a month past release. A single Ascendancy class dominating the top 1,000 spots on the standard league ladder. Chase item dupes, rollback corruptions, and other terrible bugs causing the economy to explode, conspiracy theories about how to locate citadels in the Atlas running rampant through the usually level-headed community, increased love for the campaign, more silly fake item and fake skill flexing than I've ever seen in my life, a greater desire for a patch than ever before, a huge double game director interview coming up, and oh so much more. The current state of Path of Exile 2 Early Access, in a word, is wild. It's a whirlwind of love and fear and emotion that many people have experienced over this past month and a week, and we need to talk about everything that has come out today. Salam Moana, my fellow exiles, Talkative Try here, back with another Path of Exile 2 video. We're just over 1 month into Path of Exile 2's early access, but yes, it feels like we've undergone numerous evolutions already, despite grinding your games being on holiday break for most of the last few weeks, as New Zealand shuts down during the end of year holiday celebrations. We have a ton to talk about, but super quick. If you enjoy this type of content, lightly caress the like button and give the subscribe one a boop. There's a bunch more Path of Exile 2 videos like interviews and lore dives on the way. And just a quick ad right here, everyone. We hit 50,000 subscribers in the past few days, which is just surreal. The goal for 2025 is 100,000. Let's make it happen. Or try to make it happen. Let's begin, shall we? Over a month into Path of Exile 2's early access release, the game still beats out the Path of Exile 1 11-year peak in every 24-hour period on Steam, which is wildly impressive. Here is what the actual graph looks like on Steam charts right here for Path of Exile 2. We can see the all-time peak still at 578,562. Playing an hour ago, 284,232, and it is currently January 11th, which is 1 month and 1 week into Path of Exile 2's early access launch. I have this other tab right here, Path of Exile Steam charts. Can you guess what the peak all-time for Path of Exile 1 is on Steam? It is 228,398. That means right here, if we look, Path of Exile 2 is still beating out the Path of Exile 1 all-time peak 1 month and 1 week into early access. This is with no challenges or battle pass to keep people coming back for more. This is with no extra real balance changes coming in, no extra new content. It's half the campaign. It's a skeleton of an endgame that is very enjoyable, and a bunch of other disparate, awesome systems currently in the game. It is an early access release, truly, and we'll look into that a little bit more. But despite that, people are coming back week after week playing the game. We can see that we hit our lowest peak day this week, which was at 246,821. That is still about 20,000 higher than the Path of Exile 1 peak. It's ridiculous, and there's a lot of different things that we could talk about here causing Path of Exile 2 to have such staying power. I think it's not the end game, even though many people do find that enjoyable and better than a lot of other ARPG titles out there. Not better than Path of Exile 1 though, in my opinion. I think it's mostly new players or players who really enjoy the campaign experience, and they're crafting new characters, or they're still progressing through the campaign on their first attempt, coming back after a long work day and just pushing themselves from Act 1 to Act 2 to Act 3 into Cruel, and it's taking them this long to get through it. It took me quite a long time to beat the campaign for my first time in Path of Exile 2, and I'm an ARPG veteran. I think a lot of brand new players to ARPGs are still pushing their way through the campaign, trying to reach that endgame, and that is leading to the high retention numbers. Any other thoughts below? Please let me know. Do you think that we are going to beat the peak once we get the first big content update? And I'm not talking about the upcoming patch, which we'll discuss momentarily. I'm talking about when the Druid and Huntress are added to the game. Do you think we're going to pass that 578,000 number on Steam? Probably 1 million overall if we're talking Steam, standalone, and all the consoles. I think it's possible, but I do know once the game is free to play, remember, it's a barrier to entry of $30 at least for most people. Once it's free to play, we are breaking 1 million concurrents on Steam, which is just incredible. Huge congratulations to Grinding Gear games. Now, quite shockingly, and yes, this is partially a pun, a single Ascendancy class absolutely dominates the leaderboard of the top 1,000 characters in Standard League, and while it's likely not this exact pie chart across the entire game, I'd reckon a sizable chunk of players in Endgame are indeed playing Storm Weavers. And we're talking about softcore here, not hardcore. This particular set of data is happening for one massive reason and a bunch of other tiny reasons. We've addressed the big reason before, but shall mention it again once here. It's Magic Find. Archmage Spark Stormweaver at the high end is basically the best scaling class wherein you can stack the right number of increased item rarity on your gear while being able to dominate all content. Then there's the fact that Spark as a skill is rather powerful innately. There's no need to aim, it's great at clearing, and in many boss arenas, its bouncing capabilities just annihilate bosses and hit them quite quickly with a juiced up mana stacking Archmage character. And of course, the Sorceress class has ample position on the passive skill tree to invest in the best defensive layer in the game currently, Energy Shield. Truly, the Stormweaver Ascendancy just allows everything to come together with ease in Path of Exile 2. Other honorable powerful mentions right now before the first massive patch of Path of Exile 2 hits are the Invoker, whose Ice Strike and Flicker Strike builds, among some Tempest Flurry builds, are just super cool right now. Then there's the Gemling Legionnaire stat stackers, which are ridiculously expensive, but are among the most busted characters in Path of Exile 2. And finally, we have, well, anything that can fit a Temporalis in it, which completely changes the way you navigate through the entire Path of Exile 2 game. And speaking of this incredibly special item, we now need to address the unfortunate and honestly terrible, yet hilarious, scandal that surged across Path of Exile 2 the past few weeks or so. It's terrible because it affected a bunch of people who were enjoying the game and doing their best to enjoy the economy and progress. It's hilarious because some people are participating in real money trading practices and trying to make a profit off busting an early access game. It's unfortunate due to how the situation is being viewed. And no, we're not talking about the billionaire in the room yet. Soon, Exiles. Soon. What we're discussing here are multiple bugs that blew up the economy in a few ways. Here's but a couple examples. First up, the Temporalis duping fiasco. Temporalis is a unique body armor in Path of Exile 2, arguably one of the strongest chase items in the game, only rewarded to those able to beat the Trial of the Sekimas with the no-hit relic enabled. I'm never gonna see it. Meaning, players must overcome the entire trial without being hit a single time, all 4 floors of it. This relic is incredibly rare and expensive and difficult to beat, meaning Temporalis should also be ridiculously rare and hard to obtain. However, at least one duping method was discovered, which enabled cheaters to infinitely open instances of the final part of the Trial of the Sekimas and get rewarded with as many Temporalises as they could obtain. This caused this powerful item to flood the market when it truly shouldn't have, which caused 2 things. 1. The cost lowered substantially from around 200 divines to 20 divine orbs, which then, 2, caused the rampant use of Temporalis in builds, pushing more and more supposed to be broken builds to more players than Grinding Gear Games ever thought would have Temporalises at this point in the game's life. Bad for the economy, bad for the game, bad for the players, and bad for Grinding Gear Games. Of course, this particular method was fixed and all the cheaters should get the ban hammer from Grinding Gear Games, but the damage has already been done. Another exploit example was basic but powerful. Players managed to figure out how to roll back the server after getting a particular Val Orb corruption on items they did not want, allowing them to re-roll said corruptions over and over until they got the desired result. This allowed players to get near perfect or purely perfect Val Orb rolls on some incredibly powerful items via infinite chances until this was fixed. Many other bugs existed and were squashed by Grinding Gear Games, and still others likely exist in the wild. On top of the basic damage done to the economy and integrity of the game, it's likely that these bad actors also participated in real money trading or transactions, or RMT, for some of these services, which is a plague in a game like Path of Exile 2, and if many of us had our way, would never ever exist or be used. However, some people do use it and do so in such a convoluted way, it's difficult for Grinding Gear Games to track quickly. However, eventually many RMTers are found and banned, either temporarily or permanently, which is of course the right move here. To close out this section, this is of course an early access, basically beta version of Path of Exile 2. These wild exploits and bugs are of course going to happen, and they should be expected, and it sucks that many people are thinking this game should be super clean already. It's not. It's just not. Luckily, they're being fixed now before the full release version of the game is out. It still sucks, definitely, and it harms the trade economy of honest players so much due to its immense scale. I'll also reiterate, it is shocking players participate so heavily in real money transaction play in an early access game. I'm kinda glad they are going this hard in early access, so hopefully by the time the real game hits in about a year, these type of dire exploits are all found and fixed, and nothing this bad can ever impact the economy or game again. Surgog, one of the biggest sleuths and reporters on this type of content, claimed the Temporalis duping exploit was the most detrimental and high impact bug in all of Path of Exile history. That's a powerful statement, and I trust he is correct in that assertion. Alright, 2 weeks since our last touch base, has the opinion on the endgame shifted? Well, simply put, players have gone insane with conspiracy theories attempting to cobble together a method to reliably fight the Atlas's pinnacle bosses. The primary one that made the rounds a bit ago was attempting to devise the location of citadels, wherein you fight uber-act bosses via the position of corpses in the lost towers on the Atlas. Players claim the position of the corpse told you where to go to find the next citadel. This, of course, is absolute rubbish. Instead, the theory I've adopted is one I heard from Snoobay85. The Path of Exile 2 Atlas is just like Delve in Path of Exile 1, an endless dungeon wherein all you had to do to find lots of the big bosses was to get as far away from spawn as possible. That's the approach to take in PoE 2, and well, since following that advice, in about 10 hours of playtime, I've found 3 whole citadels, which is way more than I found in the previous 35 hours of play. Now again, this is a theory, a PoE 2 theory, and nothing is confirmed here, but I'd advise if you've not been able to find these uber boss areas and would like a chance at the Arbiter of Ash pinnacle endgame encounter, you strike out from spawn and go as far away as possible. It has worked for me, and I'm really hoping with my now more limited playtime, I'll still be able to find the right citadels and get at least a single attempt at the Arbiter of Ash. And yeah, a single attempt. That's all you get right now on every single endgame system in Path of Exile 2. You die, you're done. It's an interesting debate, one that people have been firing off about on all sides. Should the one portal maps stay or go? Should the one portal bosses stay or go? I'm of the mindset, no matter what, there at least needs to be a different system for the pinnacle bosses. One and done attempts, especially on the Arbiter of Ash, on your first try, are horrible. There needs to be a story version of this fight you can repeat. Perhaps if you fail, the invitation to it drops after you complete your next T15 Waystone, and you cannot sell this version to other players. Exactly the way it is in Path of Exile 1. Grinding your games, why? Aside from the one portal debate and citadels, other topics of importance in the endgame are the meaning of the lost towers, the speed of endgame, and its overall depth. To the latter, I say, more depth shall come with time. Remember, they spent around 6 months developing endgame, from almost nothing before release, as opposed to 5+ years working on the campaign. To the others, I'm quite certain changes to the Lost Towers are coming, perhaps giving them bosses, special encounters, or something else to make them more exciting, or at least better if you invest more into them. We'll talk about that in a moment. Then for the speed of endgame, well, it's obvious the game isn't as fast as Path of Exile 1 at endgame, but it is quite the system shock when moving to endgame from the campaign. And many are curious if the rapid ramp is intentional or not. Should the curve be flattened a tad? Should this level of speed stay in the game? Should everything in Path of Exile 2 be balanced around the speed of a mace warrior? There's a chunk of fundamental game design questions to answer here, and Grinding Your Games has their work ahead of them when it comes to endgame. I'd prefer more meaningful combat in the endgame, monsters that are scary alive, bosses that appear more frequently, and upgrades that appear more often, just like in the rather on-point first 3 acts of the Path of Exile 2 campaign. At this point, I've almost wholly abandoned the Path of Exile 2 endgame, playing a little bit of it here and there, and I'm just replaying through the campaign on different characters, either in the same mode, Standard League with trade, or in new modes, in my case, hardcore solo self-found, meaning one death and I'm done, and I cannot trade or interact with other players, and it has been spectacular. I just had to put this little segment in here because lots of other people also share this same sentiment. The first 3 acts of Path of Exile 2 are absolute cinema. I gotta especially shout out the first act and the final boss fight and everything leading up to the Count Geonor battle. It is spectacular. And I am so looking forward to acts 4, 5, and 6, not only because I kind of know what's going to be in act 5 because of this art book, but because the quality level of the campaign compared to the endgame, which obviously, as I just said, they put a ton more time into, is just superb. And that is where most of my enjoyment comes from right now. Not just the design of the campaign, the bosses and the monsters and the areas and all that, but the character progression systems too. I actually like the Trial of the Sekimas and the Trial of Chaos. Yes, they need tuning, but I like the bones of them. Well, I like the foundations of them. I do. I like them as a whole. I just think some of the afflictions are ridiculous. Some of the mods in the Trial of Chaos, absolutely ridiculous. But everything else, I love. I love that entire experience from level 1 to about level 65, 70. And then the early end game, it's okay. And then the later end game, because of the problems I just pointed out before, it's a little rough. I'm just looking forward to the future. And right now, I'm typically a 1 character individual in Path of Exile 1. I play through the campaign once, I get my challenges, and I'm out. I am playing more and more characters in Path of Exile 2 than I ever have in a single league of Path of Exile 1, and the game isn't even finished yet. It's quite the testament. I cannot wait for the rest of it to come out. Now it's time for some content shoutouts, and we're starting with ya boy, Kitten Cat Noodle, who released her very first episode of the Path of Exile 2 lore series on Act 1. It's phenomenal, as we've come to expect. So if you are looking for about a 29-minute breakdown of that first act, this is where you need to go. She does a stellar job as usual. Turn it on when you're mapping, turn it on when you're running, or just chilling doing nothing. She lays out the fundamentals of Act 1 in Agam, and it's great to listen to. Additionally, I have to shout this out. This Still Sane podcast continues in January and February and into March, and this is the current lineup for the rest of January. Next up, we're talking to Lycan on the 14th, Jungroan on the 16th, and then Hog on the 21st, and then some people after that as well. We've got people scheduled all the way out to March right now. It's a very fun series in which we're talking to very different creators, especially ones that have completely different viewpoints from myself, and platforming those viewpoints and just talking about the game that we all enjoy so much. It's been wildly successful. People have really enjoyed it, and it will be continuing for the foreseeable future with the help of Mobalytics, as you see right here. They're going to have a whole dedicated section of their website for the Still Sane podcast. They help me improve the creative aspects of it. I'm really excited for what the future holds for this series. If you haven't already, check out at least a few of the episodes. The one with Kitten Cat Noodle, we talk about the lore. It was pretty awesome, and it was the longest one yet. And then before we talk about someone else who is involved with this particular website, I have to say, Neversink, his filter, it's coming out in full today. Filter Blade and his own PoE2 filter release. I know it says yesterday on this tweet, but that was released yesterday and now is today. So by the time you see this video, it's probably going to be out. There will be a link in the description, as there are links to absolutely everything else I referenced in this video, so you can go and download your very own filter blade for Path of Exile 2 today. Neversink, man, thank you for all of your hard work. And now we have to just take a moment to talk about the absolute stupidity of this saga right here, of the richest individual in the world, Elon Musk, talking about Path of Exile 2 and then showcasing to the world that he has no idea how to actually play the game and is most likely boosting his account and buying everything on it. It's pretty hilarious. Let's begin right here. So when Grinding Your Games announced that they were going to be doing a patch this coming week, he came out with this silly tweet right here in response to them. Great game, you're sandbagging a little by calling it early access, but that's okay. Now, I was a little confused because I looked up the term sandbagging and it looked like it was, he might have been insulting them, he might have been complimenting them. And I asked for some clarification on Twitter. Darth Microtransaction, as well as many others, helped me out there and said, yeah, he was basically giving it a compliment. However, I totally disagreed. Essentially, what he was saying is, hey, this is a great game. It's early access, but it plays like a full game. You guys are kind of screwing yourselves over by calling it an early access game. I totally disagreed with him. So I sent out this tweet saying, dude is totally wrong. This obviously plays really well. It's a great game. But Grinding Gear Games for years has said, we're going to release an early access version or a beta version of PoE 2. It's going to have, half the classes, half the acts, a third of the Ascendancies, a bunch of systems still skeletal and the like. It's going to be early access. There's going to be a ton of bugs and all that like. So I said, it is definitely an early access game, and this guy has no idea what he's talking about. I think, this is my take, that he sees, oh my gosh, Grinding Gear Games could have sold this at an $80 minimum, then had all the pack tiers pricing up, sold it as a full game, and then they could sell the expansions for 20, 30 bucks afterward for the Druid, the Huntress, the Paladin, the Templar, and all that stuff, and made absolute bank. What are they doing? So that's one angle. Then the other angle is, oh my gosh, please don't do this, because Grinding Gear Games, this was a real early access game. It's not like the early access crap that we've been getting for many years. Baldur's Gate 3, that was a real early access game. It wasn't completely finished, but it had a lot in there. There are other games that release into early access and they're playable for like 5 hours, 6 hours. This is not Path of Exile 2, but it's still an early access title. I don't think they're sandbagging themselves in any way here. I think they are staying true to what they have promised their community forevermore and not selling out to make more and more money. They are trying to make the best possible game and remain as truthful as possible to the entire community while doing so. So I thought he was totally wrong. He replied to somebody who replied to me right here saying that, Elon Musk isn't wrong and it's true. So that was great. I mean, it's a great game. It's a great game, but they're not lying or misleading anybody. They're not sandbagging. It's a great game, but it's still an early access game, even if it plays like many full games of the present. And then there's this absolute insanity. Elon Musk, after this, the day after that whole exchange, decided to stream Path of Exile 2 on X. And he was like the top Path of Exile 2 streamer for a bit there. However, he showcased his complete he's a fraud. That's what he did. He showed that he doesn't know anything about the game. I don't even know if he's played it a lot. He logs on to this character, doesn't seem to understand how to open the maps, doesn't seem to understand anything to do with loot or the like, even has a tab in his stash called Elon's Maps, which is interesting. And then he goes through the gear on his character and says, yeah, this is only level 52, when it's the best in-slot gloves for his character ever. And he's like, I'm in the 90s. I'm like 97 or something. I don't need these gloves. I'm going to get a better upgrade. And then he shows probably the best hardcore staff in the game and says, oh yeah, it's level 62. Gonna need a better staff here. The dude either is trolling, and he's masterfully trolling. Don't think that's true. Maybe it's a little true. Maybe he's a glutton for punishment. Maybe he's a masochist and he likes people talking about him, and he knew Quinn and Crip and everyone was going to talk about this and it was going to blow up. This might be Quinn's biggest video of all time. This one or the one that he made analyzing it, which was released 16 hours ago. It's at 213,000 views. Excellent video, by the way. I think it's going to be his biggest of all time. So either he knew exactly what he was doing, or he's just so arrogant. He just did it, and he's like, yeah, you know what? I don't care. No one's gonna notice. No one's gonna notice. And he's very self-absorbed in all of this. It's crazy. It's so obvious that someone else piloted his account, someone else got all the items on his account, and he either just didn't pay for it, or he did something very against the terms of service for Path of Exile 2 and Grinding Gear Games, and he bought it. And that would be the biggest showcase of real money trading ever in the history of Path of Exile. Maybe any game. This is crazy. So I do not envy Grinding Gear Games right now, because they have the wealthiest and maybe most influential person who's not in a governmental position in the world playing their game, and obviously he's doing something probably illegal. What are they going to do? Are they going to do anything, Exiles? Let me know in the comments below. This situation is crazy. I know lots of people have differing viewpoints on Elon Musk, but this needs to be talked about. This is probably the craziest, most ridiculous piece of Path of Exile 2 news ever. And I don't know what Grinding Gear Games should do. Let me know. Let me know if you know, because this is just crazy. Okay, enough of the shenanigans though. So where might Path of Exile 2 go from here? Everyone is anxiously awaiting the first big PoE 2 patch of the year. The Grinding Gear Games developers had a well-deserved holiday break, hopefully chilling with their families, playing their favorite games, and recuperating on the biggest GGG launch of all time. But what is on the top of their list, and when is all this going to happen? While I'd love to speculate, and I shall just a bit in a moment, we'll know for certain in about a day from the posting of this video in the very first developer interview since the launch of Early Access. Game directors Jonathan Rogers and Mark Roberts shall sit down with Darth Microtransaction and Gazi TV on their Tavern Talk podcast at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time to chat about the future of Path of Exile 2 and incoming changes, after posting their intended list of changes on their own site. Sunday, January 12th is going to be quite the massive day. Before this interview was announced, which will be restreamed on the Path of Exile Twitch channel, I thought this patch would be filled with bug fixes, some small content additions, and I mean small, and the like. Now, I'm rather confident it's going to be packed with changes. Among the top of my list, squashing as many bugs and exploits as possible, loot filters for consoles, an addition of a Waystone stash tab, please Grinding Gear Games, balance changes for low-performing builds to bring them up, balance changes to defenses, whether it's a buff to life, armor, and the like, or a nerf to energy shield, and the addition of some support gems, and finally, changes to some endgame systems, whether it's a tweak to towers, an addition of a more deterministic way to find citadels, or just lowering of monster speed. Finally, I'm also certain they'll at least address, not necessarily introduce changes for, the magic find situation. It has been the hottest topic in the community, so I think they'll touch on it, alongside the quite horrific hacking incidents that have occurred the past month or so. Anything else is awesome and extra. If somehow the druid drops in a bit, I will be floored. I think people who believe the huntress and druid are coming before March are overhyping things, which is a powerful statement coming from myself. Now, before a very serious direct-to-camera address, let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum and look at some of the best Path of Exile 2 memes I've seen thus far. This is what the Path of Exile 2 subreddit is best for. As always, sources are all in the description. And then we have this meme, which I don't really agree with. We have the half-drawn horse, essentially, or the quarter-drawn horse, with Act 1 being the most fleshed out, Act 2 being slightly faded, Act 3 being basically non-existent, and the endgame being some children's doodle of the horse. I don't agree with this picture at all. I do think Act 1 is probably the most tested, and it probably does feel the best. It's not my favorite. Act 2 is my favorite, but Act 1 is definitely the best experience in the game. And I'd argue that Endgame, while it doesn't look exactly like this, could use much more work compared to everything else in Path of Exile 2 right now. And that's already very well known by not only the community, but Grinding Gear Games. And then this one is great. For everybody in the endgame, they made a reCAPTCHA for Grinding Gear Games developers. Select all squares with walkable area. If there are none, click skip. It is a burning ground meme because everyone knows the most dangerous thing besides on-death effects in the Path of Exile 2 endgame is burning ground. Oh my goodness, it's ridiculous. And then just because we're talking to Jungro next week on the Still Sane podcast, I knew I had to throw this one in here. It's Grinding Gear Games checking out twitch.tv/Jungrown when they are finding which skill to nerf next. Yeah, pretty much true. Pretty much true. And honestly, I don't think there's anything that busted right now compared to the cast on freeze, cast on crit madness that Jung and a few others devised a few weeks back. Finally, my fellow exiles, a direct word to you all to close out the video. This is essentially a preview of my full review of Path of Exile 2 Early Access in its first phase or version, 0.1, as opposed to 0.2, which will probably bring the Druid and the Huntress. So, Path of Exile 2, what do I think about it? I'm a massive fan of the game. I think the campaign is near perfect. I think the end game needs a lot of work, and I am super excited for the future. Were things overhyped? I don't actually think so. I think the campaign is exactly what I expected, and it's the exact gameplay experience that I expected going into the game. When I get to endgame, though, everything shifts, and I'm very curious to see if Grinding Gear Games is going to move things more in the direction of how the campaign plays, or if they're going to embrace that very speedy version of the end game that they have now, which is more comparable to Path of Exile 1. I really hope they go into the more meaningful combat version that they outlined for the past 5 years with Path of Exile 2's endgame. It's going to need a lot of work. There's going to be a lot of changes to character skills and monsters too. It's not just characters that need changes. It's also monsters to make that happen. But I'm going to be here along for the ride. Honestly, I would give Path of Exile 2, right now, if I had to rate it, gun to my head, a 7 out of 10. I think in 1 year's time, knowing Grinding Gear Games, knowing all the phenomenal changes that they will make, it's a 10 out of 10. It's going to be a 10 out of 10 with ease. And then it's going to continue to iterate for years and years and years and be phenomenal. But I got to be honest, the campaign is stellar, but then the part where I spent a lot of my time in Path of Exile 1, the end game, as we all knew, 6 months to create, it's not there right now. The campaign, though, I'm going to keep playing through it. It's very fun. I'm doing a hardcore solo self-found run on my live streams right now on a sorceress. I beat Act 1 the other day, and it was probably one of the most fun moments I've had in all of Path of Exile 2 thus far. I never touched hardcore in Path of Exile 1. In Path of Exile 2, you feel like with your knowledge and with your skill, you can actually overcome these challenges. In Path of Exile 1, I thought it was far more tedious and far less skill and far less skill based. I think that's right. In Path of Exile 2, you're fighting monsters and you know how to avoid them. In Path of Exile 1, I think you more so just need to use certain skills to fight the monsters to overcome them. You're not necessarily reacting to what the monsters do to you. You're just finding the best way to bash the monsters down very fast. And in Path of Exile 2, you know, when you're fighting Count Geonor, or when you're fighting the werewolves in the Old Forest, it matters how you approach the game. And I love that. I really, really enjoy that. I gotta say, this is gonna be my main game from now on. I'm gonna play Path of Exile 1. Maybe I'll hop into Last Epoch and check out D4, but Path of Exile 2, the time that I currently have, it's my main game. How about all of you exiles? What do you think about Path of Exile 2 right now? How do you think the future is going to unfold? What could be in this wild patch that is coming out, hopefully within this next week? I will see all of you in the Twitch chat on Darth Microtransactions or the Path of Exile Twitch channel on Sunday. It's gonna be wild. Just truly, I cannot wait. And one more thing, for those of you who are still here at the end, we hit 50,000 subscribers on YouTube in the past few days, which is absolutely surreal. Thank you all so much for your support. I cannot believe it. The goal for this year, as I said earlier in the video, is 100,000. We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. I believe. As always, thanks for watching. Like the video and subscribe for much more content, and watch this video about the Trials of Ascension debate right now. I'll see you in the next video, my fellow exiles. Stay sane.